All right. Afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our C-Lab webinar on intoxicating hemp-derived cannabinoids and their impact on the greater cannabis markets, medical and adult use. I'm very excited to have our star-studded panel here of subject matter experts in this field, in this subgenre, if you will. And this is a really important topic in Florida and nationally and internationally, particularly because there are over 100,000 employees in the state of Florida that are involved in hemp cultivation, manufacturing, retail, and it's a several billion-dollar industry, or million, at least in the state of Florida. So this impacts a lot of people from an employment standpoint and from a revenue standpoint. So it's definitely a hot topic. I want to introduce myself. My name is Daniel Sparks with Sparks Consulting. Kristin Adams with Satori Minds Consulting. She's a marketing and product innovation executive expert. We have Gary Kaminsky with GSK Consulting, regulatory compliance expert in cannabis and hemp. And we also have Rudy Ellenbogen, CEO of Planta Scientific and cannabis entrepreneur. So first and foremost, I wanted to talk about I spoke about the overall topic, but if there's any questions that anybody has or any specific subtopics within the hemp world overall, if you have any questions at all, please just scroll down to the Q&A and add any questions or topics, comments, questions, concerns, all the above. So see, we have viewership from Florida and Texas and all around the country. So great to have everybody here. Let's just start it off with establishing the baseline, right, from a legal standpoint, what is hemp compared to medical marijuana, compared to adult use, and those definitions and nuances and differences are very important. So Gary, do you want to kick us off and kind of establish a baseline definitions regarding hemp and as it sits on the spectrum?
Absolutely, thanks. Back in 2018, Mitch McConnell led an effort in Congress to create the Farm Bill, which ultimately, quote unquote, legalized hemp. And back then, the thought was rope, not dope, so to speak. And the challenge was, I don't believe that the legislators at the time fully understood the cannabis sativa L plant. And to be honest, we all don't, but I think some of us understand it a little better than others. And the definition they came up with to define the cannabis sativa L plant that they wanted to be known as hemp was a cannabis sativa L plant that had below 0.3% delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol. Now that's one cannabinoid out of hundreds that are in the cannabis sativa L plant. But that was the one main cannabinoid that was known to be intoxicating. So I think that they thought that was the way to get rid of dope and facilitate rope. But what ended up happening was, as we all know in the industry, you can take any one of those cannabinoids and many times turn them into other cannabinoids. And in the case of after the Farm Bill, people thought that this was going to be all about CBD, which is the one cannabinoid that seemed to have gotten some traction and was not psychoactive or intoxicating. I think it is technically psychoactive, but it's not intoxicating. However, what ended up happening was that within a year or two, there was just too much CBD, and hemp biomass became worth nothing. And the farmers were choking and the processors were choking. And then somebody finally realized that you could just take that CBD and through a conversion process, move a couple carbon atoms around, and you all of a sudden have delta-8 THC, which is 75% as strong as delta-9. And there's even ways to create delta-9. And hence the beginning of the intoxicating hemp-derived cannabinoid business in this country, which has exploded in smoke shops and farmers markets and gas stations, and in my view, the most aggressively in the state of Florida, which is a real dichotomy that Daniel and I have talked about many times, where the medical marijuana laws are very conservative, but the intoxicating hemp-derived cannabinoid lack of laws is incredibly liberal. But in any event, we now have a nationwide business in which people are selling intoxicating beverages, and now even THCA flower, which I think we'll get into a little later, where they're in essence reading the statute and the regs as they were drafted, but unfortunately not being consistent with the intent of the statute. So you have, like I said, intoxicants being sold in unregulated environments, non-tested, and frankly, it's potentially a large public safety issue.
Thank you, Gary. So to contrast that with our medical marijuana program here in Florida, you mentioned it, Gary, 22 licensees, full vertical, fully medical, only in Florida. You have to go to a doctor to get a recommendation. You take that recommendation to the state, they issue you a card, and then you can go to any number of 500 plus dispensaries across the state to get only what is permitted in your recommendation, the routes of administration that are permitted per your doctor's recommendation. So contrast that with hemp and hemp-derived cannabinoids, where you're going into a traditional retail setting. And like Gary mentioned, there's definitely a lack of oversight. However, Florida recently passed a new bill to put some guardrails on hemp-derived products, some testing standards. So that's definitely something we can expand on and talk about. Kristin, do you want to chime in and speak to your perspective on the overarching topic, and your lens and your perspective on how it could potentially be improved here in Florida and nationally? You're on mute.
My lens is from the consumer perspective, and how that might drive legislation to keep everyone safe, and understanding what they're purchasing. So from the consumer perspective, they don't necessarily care if it's D8, intoxicating cannabinoids derived from hemp, or if it's a classic THC from a medical marijuana style THC. So this could cause a lot of problems going down the road, and drive consumer behavior in a way that is going towards the less regulated side of the product. So
Thank you. So you mentioned Delta 8. Rudy, I think that's a good segue into part of your expertise regarding being a manufacturer and a retailer. Can you kind of unpack the different cannabinoids, specifically Delta 8 versus Delta 9, hemp derived versus marijuana derived? Is there a difference? And also the disparity in testing requirements, specifically for essentially very similar, if not identical, cannabinoid that is really only distinctive because it comes from a plant with a certain level of potency.
Yeah, thank you, Danielle. And I'll compliment Gary a little bit, and Kristin too. My angle is business, manufacturing, production. And so when you look at how these two different products, hemp-derived THC, whether it's Delta 8 or Delta 9, or marijuana-derived THC, how are they cultivated? How are they manufactured, produced, extracted? They're two very different products. And I think understanding that is a basis to get to safety, consistency, cost, quality, and risks, all things that both the consumer and the regulators and the business groups in the industry care about. So to start understanding both sides, in Florida, there's over 9,500 stores that are selling hemp-derived cannabinoids, mostly Delta-8 and Delta-9 edibles and vapes. And there's only over 550 stores that are selling medical marijuana. So just from that perspective, you can see 20 times more retail presence, which means that it's a lot more accessible to buy hemp-derived Delta-8, Delta-9 cannabinoids in Florida. You were talking about revenue. The marijuana industry the medical marijuana industry in Florida last year produced around $1.8 billion in revenue, and the hemp industry around 6.9 billion. So it's about 4 times larger in Florida. And that is very important to know the forces that are at play in front of regulators, in front of business people in the state, because the opportunity is very different. To have an idea, to produce a kilo of Delta-8, you in the wholesale market, it can go for about $350, and a kilo of Delta-9 THC marijuana derived, it's upwards of $1,000 a kilo. And so 3 times more cost, a lot more restricted for people to go in, starts painting the picture of something that is much more accessible on the hemp side, that it's a conversion for people that don't know what that means. Is the process to get Delta-8 or Delta-9 THC, or even THCO or THCP or all the other ones that are coming out. Those are chemical conversions happening in the lab, transforming the CBD compound extracted from the hemp plant and transforming it into Delta-8 or Delta-9 THC. The difference there is an extra carbon in the formula. So it's a very similar compound than the naturally occurring Delta-9 THC compound that comes from marijuana. But that's the basics on my end. Okay,
so now I want to circle back to the legal aspect of all this and the gray areas that a lot of operators are operating in. So we mentioned the Farm Bill of 2018, and that's renewed every 5 years. So we're in a renewal year of the Farm Bill. And if everyone could kind of just chime in, maybe starting with Gary, regarding potential developments on the Farm Bill that's coming for this year, and whether or not those potential developments or potential changes, what their impact could be on the number of products that were just described, and the impact on interstate commerce of those compounds.
Yeah, I mean, it is important to understand that the Farm Bill specifically references that nothing, no state or government, federal agency can interfere with interstate commerce in connection with hemp products, which is why this topic is so timely, because what we have is a market of identical products, although identical not from a safety perspective or testing, but identical from a molecular perspective, going through the country. I'll call it, a lot of people ask me, is it legal? I say, well, it's not illegal, because there is a thread that you can find for any number of these products, including THCA flower, that would lead to a argument that it's not illegal. And it all comes down to the fact that the Farm Bill is missing the point with a 0.3% Delta-9 by dry weight metric on the final product. Now, they do have a total THC on from USDA guidance on testing the biomass 30 days before harvest. It has to be less than 0.3% Delta-9 THC and THCA, which is the primary cannabinoid that does carry the intoxicating materials once it's decarboxylated, aka heated up. But the final product does not carry that. So by way of definition, like Rudy was saying, we can buy 100 milligram gummies with Delta-9 in Miami because the gummy has a lot of other stuff in it, gelatin, sugar, God only knows what. And THC isn't that heavy, I guess. So it's less than 0.3% by dry weight, but yet it's and making it quote unquote legal, but it's obviously very intoxicating. And we've been working with legislators on discussing alternatives and means of potentially dealing with this problem. But the sense that I'm getting, because I work with the American Trade Association for Cannabis and Hemp, which is a 501c4 trade union that is, I'm the chief regulatory advisor. So we deal a lot with this. I do not see this changing in the next couple months, and that's what it would have to be. It doesn't appear that they're going to get their act together to do that, which means that this business will continue to be regulated on a state-by-state basis, which creates a lot of fun for compliance geeks like me and Daniel, but creates nightmares for business people like our colleagues on this panel, because the navigation of those laws in New York came up with emergency regs 2 days ago that blew up the hemp-derived Delta-9 beverage business in that state. So that's what's going on.
Thank you for that, Gary. Rudy, Kristin, you want to chime in, or do you want to move right into our home state, or at least the majority of home state?
I'll just echo a bit from my lens of consumer products. I don't think it's going to slow down the manufacturing, branding, or consumption of D8 products, like the more rogue, unregulated side that are intoxicating cannabinoids from hemp. I don't think it's going to slow it down one bit. And the stats that Rudy quoted, I think that those are only going to grow, and the demand is only going to grow. Everyone developing those kind of products are running a certain risk, and they're definitely playing in a gray area, and that could be regulated at any time. But I think everyone's going to cash in while they can, while the loophole is wide open.
Yeah, I agree. And with a 5-year birth in between updates to the Farm Bill, and of course an election year at the national level next year, there may or may not be any changes in the near future. So
just if I could add one change that we may see before Biden leaves office or gets reelected, whichever, is the rescheduling, because I'm involved with a group that made a recommendation, and that is circulating up to the White House to, and that group, even though I don't necessarily agree with it, is recommending it be rescheduled to 3, which throws it right into the FDA, which will be a nightmare for the industry. Doesn't necessarily get you interstate commerce, but may get you easier banking, but it does get you 280E. So from a tax perspective, it may be beneficial.
And potential conflicts with every single state law, namely Senate Bill 1676 that was just passed in Florida. So to give a relatively short summary on a couple of the important points for SB 1676. So this provides that a hemp extract is considered a food. And this subjects hemp extract products to various requirements, including time and temperature control. It includes a definition for attractive to children, which arguably is relatively vague. It modifies the definition of hemp to note that the concentration of Delta-9 THC may be measured on a wet weight basis for hemp extract. It says may. It requires hemp extract products to be produced in a facility that holds a food safety permit. this is a standard, right? The food safety permit in the state of Florida is essentially the permit that you get from Florida Department of Ag and Consumer Services for any aspect of running a hemp business in Florida: cultivation, manufacturing, retail. So that's not really that much of a material change. It requires that a hemp extract product to be sold in a container meeting certain requirements, including that is compliant with the U.S. Poison Prevention Packaging Act, is not attractive to children, and is suitable to contain products intended for human consumption. So in a way, this is pairing with or parring with medical marijuana law, the laws regarding governing MMTCs and their packaging, make it so that the packaging must be opaque and no colors, essentially, maybe one color, if at all. No neon, nothing that's, bright colors or attractive to children. So, this is a medical program, and that's the rules that Florida Department of Health and legislature set out for that. Further, on SB 1676, it clarifies that hemp extract may only be sold in Florida if the business is properly permitted. That's probably a good thing. It raises the minimum age for purchasing ingestible hemp extract products to 21. That's pretty significant. It provides that mislabeled products or products which are attractive to children are subject to an immediate stop sale order. And lastly, again, in summary, it grants the Department of Ag and Consumer Services authority to adopt packaging, labeling, and advertising requirements to ensure that hemp extract products are not attractive to children. So that came up multiple times. It's clearly a point of focus for not only this law that was signed by the governor, but also for the legislature and the governing bodies, FDACs, as well as the Department of Health. Like I said, the similarities to the way that medical marijuana is treated with this law it's not a coincidence. So definitely curious on all of your thoughts on this new law that's going to come into effect or has gone into effect, and the potential impact for the Florida hemp market. Anybody and everybody, come on.
On the product development side, attractive to children is very subjective, and the market's already flooded with products that are attractive to children and also adults that look like candy, that taste like candy, that are often packaged already with very bright, playful colors and a lot of branding, that is. So I wonder if they'll be doing anything proactively about that, because the market's already flooded.
Yeah, I mean, the FDA and the FTC in the last couple of weeks have sent out warning letters to Delta 8 manufacturers who have either ripped off like Cheetos or what have you, but are creating packaging similar. I don't see the state doing anything about that. I can just say that, I very kind of involved with one particular smoke shop as a client that has stocked always the latest and greatest of all of these alphabet soup cannabinoid products. And I just, I get the sense that it's only going to be if they actually make an example of a manufacturer in this state that anything's going to change, because the retailers can't do anything about it. I mean, they're buying products, and I also point out that particular piece of legislation at one point had certain provisions that were going to move towards outlawing intoxicating hemp-derived cannabinoids other than through medical marijuana, and that eventually dropped out, most likely because of the numbers that Rudy just shared with us. If I wrote that down, did you say 6.2 billion?
6.9 on hemp billion.
$6.9 billion made sure that provision did not go in.
Yeah, so that's Whitney Economic Survey, $6.9 billion in revenue on the hemp side, and 1.8 billion on the medical marijuana side. So 4 times, and I was going to touch on that as well. the economic forces behind the regulatory bodies are going to shape how this looks, and in each state is a little different. That's why you have some states in which they're banning D8 because the marijuana industry is strong, has been involved in the regulatory process intimately, and they can shape that. Here in Florida, it sort of went out of control and wasn't regulated quick enough. Now it's too big to fail. Now they're not gonna just ban it because there's way too many people. You're muted, Gary.
I think he's trying to say that they tried. They definitely tried.
Yeah, they tried. Of course. Yeah.
It won't be last.
And there's some people that came up with the methods and patented methods to convert CBD into Delta 8 and think they have exclusive rights to sell that type of product, that are trying to push that agenda one way or the other, whether it's through dispensaries or whether it's outside of dispensaries. I think what we're seeing, the trend is regulation because it's out of control. And then the next thing that we can expect is that it somehow needs to level itself in the playing field with marijuana, because that's not a small beast either, right? And so as marijuana in Florida goes adult use, you're going to see a lot more accessibility to marijuana-derived THC products, and a lot more doors, a lot more access, not requiring prescription or doctor recommendations. That's just going to make that competition more fair, if you will. And that's what I see moving on in the future. You asked before about testing. I was in Colorado, CEO of a company called Verde Natural, a vertically integrated THC company. And I mean, we had to report every day, every plant that moved from one room to another room of our 50,000 square foot indoor grow facility. Forget about testing for microbials, heavy metals, pesticides, residual solvents. So the cost to perform all that testing and all that compliance is high. And that's not even mentioning the taxation that happens on the marijuana side. Those two things are going to start leveling the playing field between the two industries, and that's going to get interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think that what needs to happen is a normalization of the regulatory scheme. And people, I've been criticized or lauded depending on what industry somebody's in. But I just believe that we need to have a more non-ambiguous way of figuring out what products can be sold where and how. And I think the tip of the spear of the regulatory problem that we're facing is intoxicating hemp-derived cannabinoids and the legacy market. Because as long as those two very large industries are allowed to proliferate, it's going to be very hard for people who are going through the rigmarole, the cost of a licensed product in marijuana to make money and to be successful. And it's even going to be a challenge for consumers. And I'd be interested to hear Kristin, because Kristin has already touched upon the fact that consumers don't really give a shit if it's medical marijuana or if it's hemp. They want what they want. And if they can go into a smoke shop and get something, they're generally going to do it. Now, obviously, purists who like, good flower are going to want cannabis sativa L that has been cultivated and picked, et cetera, through a licensed facility. But the majority of consumers don't really understand that or care. And because of that, it is too big to bust. And that's how I look at it. It's a very large industry. And a good, again, going back to like New York, what they did for the last year, New York has permitted, or at least not stopped, hemp-derived Delta-9 beverages to proliferate throughout the state. And then 2 days ago put out emergency regs that limit any of those beverages to 1 milligram and to have a 15-to-1 cannabinoid, other cannabinoid to THC, which basically says we can't do it. Well, they're one of the larger states where it's being done right now. Might have been a good idea for them to have made that missive a year ago. But now that these businesses are selling direct to consumer on the internet and in brick and mortar stores all over the place, it's very challenging because the regulatory ping pong game of enforcement is a very aggressive one. You could start with the DOJ that doesn't want to bust anybody, and they go back to the Cole memo, but whatever iteration exists, they're not going after mom and pops. They're not looking for people who aren't cartels. And then the attorneys general, who are the main state regulator or enforcement arm, they don't even understand if it's their mandate. And if it is, why are they doing it when no one else is? And then the FDA kicks it back to the Congress to say, you need to look into it. And they have done very little, where you would assume that the FDA would be a very large agency overseeing people that are putting stuff in their body that are arguably food and beverage. And similarly, with the DEA, who will come out with pronouncements on what they believe is legal or not legal, but they do nothing about it. So it's not, and then all that, if you go down to the micro level, right, you've got law enforcement who are being criticized for putting Black and brown people in prison, justifiably so, but they are not going to be incentivized to bust people for marijuana and Delta-8. It's not what cops want to do these days. So it's a real problem. It's a dilemma.
So go ahead, Kristin.
I was just going to say, to Gary's point, I was trying to put it more delicately, but you're right. They don't give a shit. And just from speaking with consumers, understanding what consumers who are buying D8 and D9 products, and even when they buy flower, what they're looking for and what they actually know, it is industry insiders in cannabis and really craft aficionados that really know what they're looking at, what they're looking for, come in with an idea of what they want to buy. A lot of consumers are simply buying based on potency or what the end effect and end result is going to be. And they're not taking all of these consumer protection issues into consideration. There is way too much trust or blind trust. And Gary, to your point, like I come from consumer packaged goods industry, from cosmetics, which is one of the least regulated consumer packaged goods industries. And to think that there is so much product on the market that is being consumed and affecting the nervous system and the brain of consumers without much oversight. And I'm not just concerned about the D8 and potency levels and things like that, but all the other junk that might be in there that we don't know about. I think all that should be on the table. And to your point, Daniel, there isn't enough oversight, even though the FDA has had a cannabis working group for years. It's just, for whatever reason, not their focus.
Thank you for that. So we spoke about Florida. We spoke a little bit about New York. I want to talk about how some other states are dealing with this in the whole spectrum. Some have banned Delta-8 outright. Other states are a lot more supportive of their hemp program. Maybe the length of the time that their individual hemp programs have existed definitely contributes to it, I think. And then I want to tie that in with THCA and THCA flower and how the interplay is playing out right now.
Where to begin? I guess we could begin with THCA flower. I mean, THCA flower is a new term, I guess. Most people have said you're talking about weed, right? But now we've got Cookies has launched a online platform to sell THCA legal, farm bill legal, I think they call it, flower in 15 states, one of which was New York, which I think this new emergency reg makes pretty clear that you can. But and that's kind of a different loophole, if that's the word that people want to embrace, because the THCA flower legal analysis, which was written by a good friend of mine who's a brilliant lawyer and has been for that industry, the hemp industry in particular. But because the guidance from the USDA on the Farm Bill requires a total THC test pre-harvest and within 30 days of harvest, these growers are claiming that they have discovered a way to pass that test, which would mean you'd have below 0.3%, I guess, times 87% THCA. But then once it's harvest, lo and behold, they're selling flower that has 28% THCA, which when you smoke it is going to get you as high as any weed you probably have ever smoked. And they're selling that on the internet, claiming it's legal. And there is an argument that it's legal if they went through that process. But I've talked to a number of the Green Team members, Kristin, as well as other OG folks, Daniel being one of those. And I'm understanding that they don't know how to do that. And then I saw a video of somebody who bought one of these eighths and it looked horrible. And he really said it looked like it was sprayed, which, by the way, people who are selling deltate flower, that's what they're doing. They're spraying hemp with deltate oil, which again is created in a lab with untested and unregulated policies and procedures, certainly not GMP. But that THC flower phenomenon has a chance to really disrupt the entire apple cart, because if no one does anything about it, and again, you think about the regulatory ping pong game I just went over, I don't know who's going to bust anybody. And I think if anybody does, it'll be a state, not a Fed. And which would mean that you've got MSOs and others who are trying to sell flower at $50 to $80 an eighth, being taxed, being unable to deduct their business expenses, et cetera, et cetera. And then you've got cookies selling it on the internet, not being taxed, not doing anything. You may, I don't know if you're going to see them, if you can't beat them, join them or not. But I don't know what's going to happen with the THCA aspect. And I think that that's a very unique development in the industry.
I'm curious to see how, for example, if Cookies is shipping THCA flower, I don't know if it was from Arizona or from California or from what subsidiary of Cookies, right? So they're mailing it all over the place. Let's say Kansas, for example. Somebody, Kansas resident, receives a package in the mail and it's intercepted by USPS, however it was sent, whatever the case. That the jurisdictional lines, right? Where are they drawn? If it's shipped in the mail, that's federal jurisdiction. It's crossing state lines. But like you mentioned, Gary, who is going to enforce that? Is it going to be the Postmaster General? Is it going to be the FBI that's coming to bust you for buying an eighth?
It's down to who really wants to enforce it, right, Daniel? Like I don't know if anybody's had an experience through TSA lately, but there are so many adult use states that typically people are going to travel with controlled substances. And I've had the personal experience of having TSA go through my luggage, either randomly or because I left a lighter or something in there. And I've watched them pull out my controlled substances and put it back and confiscate my lighter. And all that tells me is that's an example of a government agency where it's not their mandate. It's just, it would be a major, what are they going to do with it? They don't care. So take your example, Daniel. I guarantee you the Postmaster General isn't your problem. And in fact, I know of people who are selling products online and mailing them. Their mail of choice is USPS because of due process issues and the likelihood or unlikelihood that they are going to do anything about it. So I'm not really sure who's going to go into that person's house in Kansas and do something about it.
And then the inverse to the same scenario, if whatever retailer that is cultivating cannabis either as a hemp cultivator or as a medical or adult use cultivator. Like, where is this coming from? Where is this flower coming from that's then being shipped, right? It presumably is being grown by a legal entity, specifically if Cookies, for example, is putting their name on it. So then is there a regulatory enforcement risk on the sending side from where they're sending it from? You mentioned about, the possibility for other operators besides hemp operators, because Cookies is not the only company that's shipping THCA flower, mind you. It's cat and mouse, it's ping pong, it's why we're talking about it today, right? Because it's a nuanced issue that really there seems to be more questions than answers at the moment. And the risk takers are rolling the dice. So Kristin, Rudy, I just merged your names there for a second. Please tell me your thoughts on this development.
Kristin, please go.
Oh, well, THCA marketing at its finest, always looking for the new angle. I mean, I don't understand myself how they got through that initial testing. But preheating, of course, there would be more THCA. That's always been the case. I don't think that that's something new. They just found a new angle to get through the loophole, if I'm not mistaken. Rudy, you're the expert on the flower side.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think understanding what's the patterns that we're seeing. The pattern that we saw with CBD or hemp flower, hemp biomass, or smokable hemp, sprayed with Delta 8 THC that is derived from a converted CBD concentrate into flower, opened that possibility. So now you're seeing all these other variations, THCA flower. I mean, it's the loophole that's opening up and showing in different forms. And the only path forward that I see is that they all get regulated, and there's a standard that includes everything, that people start understanding what is something that is made in the lab, transformed using chemistry, and what is something that is naturally occurring in a plant and is being extracted. And that's why you're seeing such a big difference in price, because they are different products. You can have the same molecule, but there's a lot of, I've seen Delta 8 lab test results with potency, and there are peaks that they don't know which cannabinoids those are, right? And so from a safety and quality standpoint, there are big differences. It's just that we're at a stage in the development of this industry, or both of these industries, that is early on, and it's so complex, and it's coming at a time where there's so many things going on. The FDA had their hands full with COVID, and that's not like dismissible. That's real, right? And it's a real concern for the large majority of Americans, and so to me, the path forward is going to be state by state. You can look at history and see how alcohol was regulated, and I think interstate commerce is a whole other animal. I think much before that, there is how each state is regulating and what will work best. And I think that Florida is showing the example that, they're both going to learn to coexist.
I think that, and I'm glad you pointed out that the FDA had a couple other things on their plate. So I don't want to come off as just a government basher, because I didn't write these things and I wasn't there. But I can tell you there are some states that are doing some thoughtful things. Minnesota, case in point, a year ago, they maybe did something that wasn't that thoughtful, but they they basically created adult use hemp, as we called it, because they put out a piece of legislation that talked about non-intoxicating cannabinoids and defined it. And then at the end of it, defined that as anything that had no more than 5 milligrams and 50 per package. Well, we all know that's very intoxicating. So what they ended up doing was they passed adult use marijuana and have merged the businesses in a way that have created like a low potency hemp product that is regulated like marijuana. And I think Minnesota is the wild, wild west. You can go into a liquor store and buy, Pabst Blue Ribbon beer and Pabst Blue Ribbon hemp derived D9 next to each other. You're going to be able to buy hemp D9 beverages at the Minnesota Twins game very soon. On the other hand, you have another state like Connecticut, which merged the two and just said, yeah, you can sell Delta 8 if you're a licensed marijuana retailer, and just subjected the intoxicating hemp-derived cannabinoids to license regulation, which I think is thoughtful as well. It kind of freaks people out who have been making a lot of money, in your case, $6.9 billion. I don't think they would appreciate that. But it is trying to bridge the gap. Other states have, and maybe some of these have come up with definitions, synthesized cannabinoids, to take into account what Rudy's talking about with the conversion. Problem with that is mother liquor, MOLO, is not covered by that, which is the THC that's left over after you get all the CBD and other shit out. It's just liquid that literally is THC from the hemp plant. And that is hard to say it isn't legal. Now, the DEA has taken the position that no matter where you are in the process, if you have a substance that is above 0.3% Delta 9 THC, it's a controlled substance no matter where it came from. Well, that's kind of a ridiculous position, considering that no one could ever sell a non-intoxicating cannabinoid product, because anytime you take a biomass that's filled with water, sticks, and other stuff, and then you put it into the first phase to get to your crude, it's going to be a lot more intense on everything else that's left, namely the THC, et cetera. So these are the complexities that, again, unfortunately, Mitch McConnell did not take into account, which is why he's now being called the grandfather of Delta 8, and he doesn't appreciate that. But notwithstanding, he still hasn't been able to figure out a way to get his bill amended, and we don't expect it right now.
Yeah, safe, maybe dead in the water for the summer. So I've heard. We have about 10 minutes left. I definitely want to open it up to any additional questions. I see one question I'm going to address here, but I just want to encourage everybody listening that if you have any questions or comments or things you want to hear us talk about, please write in the chat or Q&A. So Joshua writes, I'd like to understand the sourcing and or supply chain of hemp building materials. I'm a consultant looking to utilize and promote hemp building materials to contractors and real estate professionals in terms of carbon sequestering, ESG goals, and the major advantages utilizing hempcrete, hemp paneling, hemp hurd installation, etc. Which groups, companies, professionals are moving hemp forward in Florida and across the nation? Thank you. Well, I'll start. I'm familiar from outside reading about hempcrete, right? And the fact that it can be used for insulation as well as exterior. It's a multifunctional product that can eliminate the need for a series of stacking building materials. As far as which companies or professionals are moving hemp forward in Florida, apparently there are quite a few, particularly in the cultivation space. So I'll open that up to the panel.
On the fiber side, most of my connections are in North Carolina, FiberX, Bear Fiber, but yeah, there is a lot of exciting movement, and a lot of the farmers in the the Southeast that originally planted for CBD have replanted for fiber and have a lot of excitement in that direction now. So that's definitely gaining momentum.
Interesting. Joshua, I hope that answered at least part of your question. And please connect with us to follow up on that. Michael Smith writes, what about bars and restaurants having hemp-derived Delta-9 drinks in Florida? The Department of Ag oversees the retail sales, but another agency oversees the liquor sales. How do we best navigate this? Tread lightly, I would say. Gary, I think you would agree.
I mean, it's interesting because like we've said, it's pretty clear that Florida is very liberal when it comes to hemp-derived intoxicants. And it feels like it's just a matter of time till you see HD9 bevs in Live and wherever else you may go. I have thought about this not only here, but in other states recently, because we've had some inquiries. And it seems like it's one thing to sell HD9 in a smoke shop and another to sell it in a place where they actually manufacture and sell food and also sell liquor. So, I mean, I'm not sure how that's going to play out. If I had to guess, you're going to start seeing it and it'll play out by somebody realizing that it happened and maybe either trying to find the way to stop it from happening here. But that's how it's happening in other states in terms of hemp D9 beverages.
Yeah, from a business perspective, my angle and my thought would be an establishment that is selling food, beverages, liquor is a lot more regulated and has a lot less leverage in its economic position in the marketplace to be able to withstand scrutiny from regulatory bodies. Right? There's a lot of ways that somebody can get shut down on a bar, a restaurant, or a liquor store or whatnot. If you have and also economically, your license is a major intangible asset in one of those establishments. When you're talking about having a smoke shop, your inventory is your primary asset there. You can move and find another location, and that's it. So the leverage that any regulatory body would have over those establishments, forget about the fact that they don't have to deal with the consequences of the people experiencing whatever experience they're getting from the product consumed. If you're at a bar or a restaurant, you have to deal with what's happening with the people that are using what you're selling. But at a smoke shop, you don't see them.
That's right. On-site consumption versus not, big difference. Thank you, everyone. So Scott Hudson asks, how many hemp stores are in Florida compared to medical stores? Well, there are, if you're asking about medical marijuana dispensing facilities, there are 538 as of last Friday or around that number. Correct me if I'm wrong. Hemp stores, I do not know the answer to that. I believe you should be able to research food safety permits.
Yeah, over 9,500. The number that I got was 9,558 stores.
So there you go, 500 to almost 10,000, and 1.9 or 1.8 billion versus 6.9 billion. There's 800,000 plus patients in the state of Florida. Not every single one of them is actually participating in the medical program. Some have their cards for, I guess, other reasons. Can't really surmise, why or guess. But there are over 20 million people that live in Florida and 120 million that come here every single year. So if you have a hemp business in Florida, I guarantee you that you're paying attention to local, state, federal developments, and C-Lab and our esteemed panel and everyone listening, right, definitely contributes towards that that expertise and that experience in this. So definitely want to encourage everybody listening, if you haven't joined already, please go to joinclab.com and read up about us, right? We're one of the, if not the only professional networking group in Florida related to cannabis that is really at the forefront of issues like this. So really appreciate everybody making the time for this really informative webinar and this important issue. We still have a couple minutes left. If anybody has any last questions, how many hemp stores in Florida compared to medical? We answered that. Anybody else want to talk about anything as it relates to hemp, upcoming developments? We got a couple minutes left.
Well, I just thank you for facilitating the conversation. I think this is what we need. You have, consumer marketing and product development angle, business and regulatory and legal here, and seeing the different aspects and understanding the issue and discussing it is, I think, the path to finding better solutions where these two can coexist and they can be safely administered to people.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say that one, thanks for having me on this as well. I really enjoy this, and it's great to have business coupled alongside us compliance geeks, because they see the practicality of the challenges that of the stuff that we're writing, I guess. But until they really understand at the core that there is one plant and it's called cannabis sativa L, and it has all kinds of amazing characteristics and efficacies for all kinds of wellness, some of which includes getting you high. It's kind of hard to put that genie back in the bottle, but that's really what should have happened to begin with. And you see a lot of people, purists, who talk about the one plant, and that would be nice, but I just don't see it happening. So that means you've got to break it down by what the cannabinoids do. But even then, you could have non-intoxicating cannabinoids that are dangerous if they're manufactured and not extracted appropriately. So this isn't just an intoxicating issue. It's a macro issue on how a particular plant should be extracted down into the finished products that we all want from it.
And I'll just add my 2 cents is sustainability at every level is important, and that includes health of businesses and the health of the consumer, and consumer education and creating the environment so the consumer knows what they're purchasing, knows how it's affecting them short-term and long-term. I think it's super important. It's important for brands. It's important for the population. Our health, this is only going to grow as a consumer segment. So these conversations are really important with people who actually know what we're talking about, and to continue to have these conversations vital. So thank you. Thanks for including us.
Absolutely. Thank you again. Kristin Adams with Satori Minds Consulting, Gary Kaminsky with GSK Consulting, and Rudy Ellenbogen with Planta Scientific. I'm Daniel Sparks Consulting and C-Lab. This has been great. Really appreciate all the insights and conversation and questions, and hope to see you all again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great night. Thanks,
Yeah.
everyone.